Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to David's Sports Show, hosted by yours truly, David. We had a very exciting and entertaining week 3, and man, oh man, football is so back. Well, y'all, let's kick it off. We begin today's episode with a look at week 3 recap. So let's get into it. All right, let's get into it, y'all. The Bills, Thursday night football. Bills versus Dolphins. Bills defeat the Dolphins 31-21. The Bills entered this game as an 11-point favorite, and despite a Miami opening drive touchdown, it looked like Buffalo would run away with a blowout victory. They scored 2 touchdowns on their initial couple of drives and then drove into the red zone on the third possession. The drive stalled because of questionable play calling deep in Miami territory, so Buffalo had to settle for a field goal. Matt Prater missed, but it still seemed as though Buffalo would win by a large margin. Everything changed, however, on the final drive right before halftime. Another a 16-play drive in which Tua Tagovailoa inexplicably converted a myriad on third downs. This eventually led to a touchdown pass to Jalen Waddle, tying the game at intermission. The Bills opened the second half with a quick touchdown drive, but stalled on several possessions. After that, Buffalo looked like it was going through the motions, and this allowed the Dolphins to tie the game once again. They even appeared as though they'd had the chance to take the lead, but Zach Sieler roughed the Buffalo's punter, giving Josh Allen another chance. Allen, Allen took advantage, tossing a touchdown pass to Khalil Shakir to go up 28-21. The Dolphins had another chance to tie, and they continue to convert countless third downs. They entered Buffalo territory, but Tagovailoa stared down Waddle, allowing Bills linebacker Terrell Bernard to snatch an interception. The Bills kicked a field goal on the ensuing drive, sealing the victory to improve to 3-0. And now we go to the Panthers' 30-0 victory over the Falcons. The Falcons had a great win over the Vikings last week, but as impressive as that victory was, this loss was way worse. The Falcons completely embarrassed themselves against one of the worst teams in the NFL. Atlanta's defense was pitiful while trying to stop the Carolina offense. The Panthers didn't accumulate too many yards, but they were able to convert some key first downs to give themselves an early touchdown. McMillan made some big catches in the first half to help give the Panthers a 10-0 lead heading into halftime. The worst aspect of the Falcons, however, was Michael Penix Jr. The second-year quarterback had one of the most pitiful performances you'll ever see from someone at that position. Penix nearly threw 3 interceptions in the first half despite battling a horrific defense. The Atlanta offensive linemen didn't help matters as Penix saw more pressure than expected. However, Penix was awful, and it seemed as though the Panthers knew every time he would throw a screen because a defender would always be there. This was the case at the beginning of the third quarter. Penix, seeing a lot of pressure on a passing attempt, heaved a reckless throw to the outside. Panthers cornerback Chow Wade Smith, just sitting and waiting there, snatched the ball, returned the turnover for a touchdown. What was a manageable 10-0 deficit for the Falcons turned into a 17-0 loop-sided affair. The Panthers added a field goal following a failed Penix fourth down conversion, giving them a 20-0 lead, and all hell broke loose from there. And now we go to one of the more exciting games, where the Cleveland Browns defeated the Green Bay Packers 13-10. Anyone who loves shootouts and hates defensive struggles must have been miserable watching this game. Both defenses were stout, and didn't allow anything. This was a 3-0 affair at halftime, but when the Packers finally broke through and scored a touchdown in the third quarter, it seemed as though Cleveland wouldn't have a chance to overcome a 10-0 deficit. The Browns had a shot at a touchdown early in the fourth quarter, but the Packers had an amazing goal line stand. Despite getting flagged, allowing Cleveland to have a fresh set of downs, the Packers didn't just keep Cleveland out of the end zone. They pushed the Browns back to the 20-yard line, forcing a field goal. Green Bay was still comfortably ahead, 10-3, but no cookie Jordan Love made a crucial mistake with an interception. This time, the Browns converted at the goal line with a Quinshon Judkins touchdown. The Packers bounced back to move deep into Cleveland territory, but blocked a field goal gave the Browns a chance to win this game. Joe Flacco hit David Njoku with an intermediate pass to set up the decisive field goal by Andre Schmitz, who connected from 55 yards. And now we move on to the Jaguars' 17-10 victory over the Texans. This game featured some of the worst collective quarterbacking anyone will ever see in the NFL. This is especially surprising because it was from two players who were chosen in the top of their respective NFL drafts. Trevor Lawrence began the afternoon completing 6 of his first 7 passes, but was putt-rid after that. He completed just 14 of 33 passes the rest of the way and made lots of mistakes, and yet CJ Stroud may have been even worse. His stats look better, but the defense he faced wasn't nearly as good as Houston's. The two quarterbacks combined for a comedy of errors in the fourth quarter. The fun begins when Stroud was picked because he didn't see Jordan Lewis. Lawrence responded by heaving an interception into double coverage. This set up Houston's solo touchdown of the afternoon, with Stroud locating Nico Collins to tie the game at 10. Lawrence had a pass batted at the line of scrimmage on the ensuing drive and then hurled a helpless pass on fourth down. The Texans looked like they'd be able to milk the clock and kick the decisive field goal, but Collins lost a fumble while trying to spin out of a tackle. The Jaguars moved into field goal range, and Houston wisely allowed them to score a touchdown, so they'd have a chance to tie with some time remaining. However, Stroud missed Christian Kirk for a touchdown and then was picked on a deflection to end the game. And now we move on to the Vikings' 48-10 win over the Bengals. The Vikings had an ugly performance on Sunday Night Football versus the Falcons in Week 2, but they were getting some major reinforcements back from injury. Christian Darrisaw, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Harrison Smith all returned to give Minnesota a much-needed boost. The 3 returning players all made big impacts offensively. The Vikings drove down the field and scored a touchdown on the opening drive, as Carson Wentz had a much better protection than J.J. McCarthy experienced. The possession was capped off by a touchdown to Josh Oliver. Defensively, the Vikings secured a pick 6 on the second drive as Jake Browning panicked under pressure. On the next possession, Van Ginkel sacked Browning. On third down toward the end of the first half, Noah Fant, who was strip sacked by Isaiah Rodgers, who scooped and scored to give the Vikings a 24-3 lead. And if that wasn't enough, Rodgers punched the ball out of Ja'Marr Chase's hands in the final minute prior to intermission. Following the turnover, Wentz found Justin Jefferson for a long gain, setting up a 5-yard Jordan Mason touchdown to give the Vikings an astronomical 34-3 lead heading into the break. Steelers 21-14 victory over the Patriots. Mike Vrabel is a very good head coach, but he needs to be held completely responsible for this loss. Oh, yep. The New England front office spent a high second-round pick on Trayvon Henderson, but Vrabel's stubborn stance on his running back rotation cost his team a potential victory. Ramondre Stevenson was given the start at running back, even though he's a far inferior talent compared to Henderson. Stevenson, who has a history of fumbling, coughed the ball up early to set up a Pittsburgh touchdown. This wasn't the only time Stevenson screwed his teammates with poor ball security. He was reaching for a potential touchdown in the third quarter, but lost another fumble. This would have been nice time to get Henderson, but Vrabel cleaned up Antonio Gibson instead. Gibson promptly responded by fumbling at midfield. Henderson took over after that, but by then the damage had already been done. Besides, Drake May was also giving the ball away. The Patriots had a great drive in the second quarter in which they converted on 4th and 1 on their own 10-yard line, but the possession concluded without any points because May was intercepted in the end zone while staring down Kayshon Boutte. May later lost a fumble in Pittsburgh territory after another 4th down conversion. Despite the 5 turnovers, the Patriots still had a chance to win the game because the Steelers were doing nothing offensively. Pittsburgh accumulated just 203 net yards, so the Patriots were driving potentially tie at the end. May completed a 4th down throw to Pop Douglas, but the slot receiver ran backwards and lost the line to gain, giving Pittsburgh the victory. Eagles 33, Rams 26. The score early in the third quarter may not have indicated it, but this seemed yet another big win for the Eagles. They scored on the opening drive thanks to two tush pushes. Albeit with some controversy, the NFL stated that it would call the tush push much tighter because teams complained that Philadelphia's offensive linemen were false starting on the play. Sure enough, one of the guards false started on the initial tush push, but the officials ignored it. The Eagles scored on the second to give them a 7-0 lead. The rest of the game was all Rams. The Eagles had 37 net yards on the opening drive, but had -4 net yards the rest of the first half. Los Angeles' fierce pass rush destroyed Philadelphia's offensive line, which lost Lane Jackson to injury. The Eagles were constantly stuck deep in their own territory and couldn't get anything going. The Rams, meanwhile, didn't have much of an issue scoring thanks to some great runs by Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, and a long completion from Matthew Stafford to Davante Adams. The Rams took a 19-7 lead into the break. Things only got worse for the Eagles following intermission. On the opening possession of the third quarter, Jalen Hurts was strip sacked deep in his own territory. The Rams recovered, and on the next play, Stafford hit Williams for a touchdown to go up 26-7. The Eagles stormed back and finally got going with A.J. Brown looking like a functional player for the first time all year. Philadelphia put together numerous scoring drives after going down 26-7 and eventually took a 27-26 lead. The Rams still had one more chance, however, and they moved into field goal range to potentially win the game. However, Joshua Carty's kick was blocked and returned for a touchdown by Jordan Davis to give the Rams bettors one of the worst backdoor covers they'll ever experience. Can you hear me? How long is it? Hello. All right, we'll be right back, y'all. We're having some technical difficulties. Okay, y'all, we are back. So sorry about that. Had some technical difficulties. Okay, we will continue this with going over the Colts 41 to Titans 20 victory. The Colts continue to impress. It's likely that many expect the Indianapolis Carriers to turn into a pumpkin, but this year Cinderella continues to win, improving to 3-0 with a dominant road victory over their divisional rival. This game was never close, and the defense set the tone early with a pick six of Cam Ward when Kenny Moore jumped the route and scored easily. The offense dominated after that, with the Titans having severe issues dealing with Jonathan Taylor. Daniel Jones, meanwhile, misfired on just 7 occasions. Ward was at least able to bounce back a bit with an effort that wasn't too miserable. That said, while he was able to move the chains well in between the 20s, he often stalled in Indianapolis territory, forcing his kicker into long distance tries on numerous occasions. Ward's lone touchdown pass came in garbage time. And now we go to the Commanders' 41 to 24 win over the Raiders. The Commanders weren't going to have Jayden Daniels coming off an ugly loss to the Packers. They wouldn't need him, however, as they prevailed despite Marcus Mariota starting under center. Washington didn't win in spite of Mariota either. He played well with plus accuracy and mobility. He misfired on just 6 occasions and had some key runs to keep the chains moving. He also rushed into the end zone on 1 occasion. The only mistake he made on the day was a lost fumble at the end of a long run while this game was in its early stages. The defense came up big as well. The Commanders limited Ashton Jeanty to fewer than 50 rushing yards until an 18-yard run in garbage time. And speaking of garbage time, Trey Tucker caught 2 of his 3 touchdowns late in the game, but this contest was well decided by then. And now we go to America's Game of the Week. Game to watch was the Buccaneers 29 to 27 win over the Jets. For the third straight game, Baker Mayfield led Tampa Bay to game-winning score late in the fourth quarter. The Jets looked like they were going to be blown out, but they kept playing and almost pulled off a huge comeback. With the Falcons losing, the 3-0 Buccaneers have a 2-game lead in the NFC South. New York is going to play hard and compete under head coach Aaron Glenn, but at 0-3, clearly the Jets are in rebuilding mode. On the opening possession of the game, the Jets ran a 14-play drive to produce a field goal for New York. On the ensuing drive, Bucky Irving took a check down for about 30 yards before a series of penalties kept marching them back. Aaron Glenn could have declined one of them to force a long field goal or punt, but he kept accepting them. Then Sauce Gardner was flagged for pass interference on an incompletion on a 3rd and 29 that gave the Bucks 26 yards and a first down inside the 30. The 5th holding penalty on Tampa Bay on the drive took away a chunk completion to Mike Evans, but Chase McLaughlin hit a 54-yard field goal to tie the game at 3. The Jets responded with some chunk gains to Garrett Wilson and a run by Breece Hall to set up another field goal. Tampa Bay took the lead with a 30-yard completion to Emeka Egbuka and then quick slants to Mike Evans in the end zone. Late in the second quarter, Taylor was strip sacked by Antoine Winfield Jr. and Vita Vea recovered the Jets 33, and Tampa Bay turned that into a field goal with under 30 seconds remaining in the half. Jamal Dean picked off Taylor and returned it 55 yards for a touchdown to give the Buccaneers a 20-6 lead at the half. Tampa Bay added another field goal early in the fourth quarter. Taylor put a drive together that ended with a short touchdown pass to Garrett Wilson. The Bucks responded with another long field goal from Chase McLaughlin to make it a 26-13 lead, but the Jets' offense was firmly finding some rhythm, and Taylor driving them through the air. And on a 4th and goal, he found Allen Lazard in the back of the end zone for a touchdown to make it 26-20. With about 3.5 minutes remaining, Mayfield scrambled for a 33-yard gain, and that set up a 33-yard field goal from McLaughlin to put the game away. But shockingly, Will McDonald, the sixth, hurled the offensive line, blocked the field goal, and scooped it up and ran it back about 50 yards for a touchdown. That gave the Jets a 27-26 lead late in the 4th quarter. Tampa Bay got the ball with about 1 minute and 40 seconds remaining. After missing a wide open receiver deep downfield for a touchdown, Mayfield connected with Egbuka for a 28-yard completion into Jets territory. A screen to Sterling Shepard moved them inside the 20, and McLaughlin hit a chip shot game winner on the final play of the game. Both teams had some significant injuries worth watching. Mike Evans and Sauce Gardner walked into the locker room in the second half and did not return. And now we go to the Seahawks dominating win over the Saints 44-13. This game went as expected with Seattle dominating the Saints. New Orleans was terrible in all 3 phases and especially on special teams. At just 3-0, at 2-1, at 2-1, Seattle joins the Rams and Cardinals on the heels of a 3-0 lead. 49ers New Orleans is already 3 games back in the NFC South, and the question for the Saints is only whether they will land the number 1 pick and if young players can prove to be starters for seasons to come. To open the game, the Saints failed on a 4th and 2 just past midfield, and that set up the Seahawks with good field position. Seattle went down the field, and Darnold connected with Jackson Smith for a 12-yard touchdown. Seattle quickly expanded the lead with Torrey Horton returned a punt 85 yards for a touchdown. New Orleans' inept special teams struck again when they allowed a blocked punt. Seattle took over at the Saints' 11-yard line, and a couple plays later, Kenneth Walker fought his way into the end zone to put Seattle up 21-0. The Saints responded with a field goal drive, but once again, special teams were killing New Orleans, and the Seahawks returned the kickoff 60 yards. A few plays later, Darnold connected with Horton for a touchdown from about 15 yards. Seattle continued to dominate. Darnold lofted in a beauty to Smith for a 45-yard touchdown. For a 45-yard gain, a couple plays later, Walker plunged into the end zone to put Seattle up by 32. Midway through the 2nd quarter, New Orleans' horrific special teams play continued with a missed field goal, but Seattle made one of their own to go up 38-3 at the half. In the 3rd quarter, Seattle tacked on 2 field goals to open the 4th quarter. Rattler tossed a short touchdown, and that was the end of the scoring in garbage time. The Chargers defeated the Broncos 23-20. The Chargers seemed to be in control out the game. In the opening half, they led just 10-7 at the half, but the Broncos could barely get anything going offensively. Meanwhile, the Chargers were able to run the ball effectively with Omarion Hampton, and after Najee Harris went down with a nasty-looking Achilles injury, Justin Herbert had to hurdle over Harris while dropping back into the pocket of play, and all the announcers could say was, "Oh no." The game was close, however, which allowed the Broncos to take the lead with some impactful plays. In the 3rd quarter, J.K. Dobbins broke 2 long gains on the same drive, including one where he tiptoed down the sideline but managed to stay in bounds. Denver took a 14-10 lead, and that advantage quickly turned in 17-10. Once the Chargers fumbled the ensuing kickoff return, The Chargers trailed for most of the second half, but they were able to put together a drive of 61 yards and 43 yards to score 10 points. At the very end, Herbert found Keenan Allen in the end zone to tie the game, and then he moved the team deep into Denver territory with a 12-yard completion to Ladd McConkey. This set up a 43-yard game-winning field goal by Cameron Dicker to win the game. And now we move on to the Bears' dominated win over the Cowboys, 31-14. The Cowboys and Bears were expected to engage in a high-scoring shootout, but that was never meant to be. Things began poorly for Dallas when Javonte Williams lost a fumble in Chicago territory. The Bears took over and took advantage with Caleb Williams firing a deep touchdown pass to Rome Odunze. Dallas once again couldn't get on the board, but because of an injury this time, CeeDee Lamb suffered an ankle injury, and while he tried to return to action, he never could stay on the field because the swelling was too severe. With Lamb sidelined for most of the game, Dallas' offense was completely stagnant. Meanwhile, the Bears were able to pile on the points with the same Ben Johnson magic we saw from the former Lions offensive coordinator in recent years. One play was a long flicker touchdown from Williams to Luther Burden. Johnson was able to involve Burden and some other players creatively throughout the afternoon, while the Cowboys struggled to generate any sort of offense. And now we go to the 49ers 16-15 win over the Cardinals. Nick Bosa, one of the best defensive players in the NFL. So when he was lost for the game in the opening quarter, the Cardinals were going to have an easier time moving the ball. Arizona did not get the memo, however, as this game was just 6-6 at the intermission. The Cardinals made plenty of mistakes offensively, including some drops by Marvin Harrison Jr., who let a potential touchdown fall through his hands. At one point, Amari DeMarcado also dropped a potential touchdown on another drive. Of course, Amari shouldn't have been playing, but James Conner suffered a nasty knee injury in the third quarter. The 49ers took a 13-6 lead despite screwing up in the red zone on one occasion. The Cardinals immediately broke out of their offensive funk as Hugh Harrison secured a deep reception, and then Zay Jones drew an interference flag in the end zone to set up a quick touchdown from Kyler Murray to Trey McBride. This game was tied at 13, but the 49ers were pinned at their own 6-yard line. This poor field position ended up hurting the 49ers as Dominic Cooney committed a holding penalty in the end zone for a safety. The 49ers, however, got the ball back, and thanks to a 20 and 11-yard reception by Christian McCaffrey and Kendrick Bourne, respectively, they were able to move into field goal range and convert the decisive kick. And now we go to the Sunday Night Football. Chiefs 22, Giants 9 victory. Though the Chiefs won by 2 scores, this was a tight battle for a while. It was tied at 6 before Kansas City kicked a field goal right before halftime. The Chiefs couldn't get anything going offensively while Giants put together a good-looking drive with Cam Scottaboo making some big plays. The Giants even had a chance at the lead, but Russell Wilson threw an interception on a deep shot in the end zone. Though the Chiefs struggled offensively throughout the first half, the switch flipped on after halftime. Patrick Mahomes couldn't escape the pocket because the Giants' edge players did a great job of keeping him contained, but he hit some big throws to Tyquan Thornton, including a deep touchdown and reception right near the goal line that set up Kareem Hunt's score. When Kansas City gained offensive momentum in the second half, the Giants couldn't muster anything outside of a long field goal. Russell Wilson saw some major regression and had one of the worst red zone sequences anyone has seen this year. The crowd was not happy, booing Russell Wilson at every opportunity. And with that being said, we have some breaking news coming out of New York. The New York Giants have officially decided to bench Russell Wilson, and Jackson Dart will take his place in week 4 against the Chargers. We will keep an eye on this situation and see what happens, but a big move by New York. And that takes us to the next part of our segment. Are the Colts pretenders or contenders? So we go now to topic number 2. Not many had the 3-0 Indianapolis Colts in their likely NFL news headlines. But here we are. As Daniel Jones and Indy are among the select few perfect teams remaining heading into week 4, the Colts have posted wins against the Dolphins, Broncos, and Titans to start the season. Indianapolis faces some upcoming tests against the Rams, Raiders, Cardinals, and Chargers in their next 4 games. Things are about to get real clear on whether the Colts are contenders or pretenders. Given the Daniel Jones stats, it came as a surprise when the Colts chose the veteran over Anthony Richardson. The perception over the offseason was that Indy signed Jones to add fuel for Richardson heading into training camp. As it turns out, Jones became more than just a high-paid backup. Though through the first 3 NFL games, Jones has thrown for 816 yards and 3 touchdowns. Most importantly, Jones has yet to throw an interception. The Colts have emerged as heavy favorites to win the AFC South at minus 150. Indy sits at plus 1400 among your potential NFL picks to win the AFC and reach the Super Bowl. Something tells me the Colts will eventually come back down to earth for a bit, but Indy has already had a head start in its attempt to make the NFL playoffs. Look for Jaguars and Texans to also provide more competition in the AFC South as the season goes on. And now let's get to our next segment, our injury updates. Or injury report, actually. Okay. Alright, here we go. CeeDee Lamb injury update. Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb suffered an ankle injury on Sunday against the Bears. Lamb briefly tried to return to the game, but ran just one route and hobbled back to the sideline. Lamb did express some initial optimism about the injury, but it now looks like he could be sidelined up to a month with a high ankle sprain. George Pickens, Jalen Tolbert, and Cavante Turpin to earn more targets with Lamb set to miss time, but Jake Ferguson could be the big fantasy winner in that scenario. Ferguson turned 14 targets into 13 catches for 82 yards against the Bears. And now we have a James Conner injury update. Cardinals running back James Conner had to be carted off the field after suffering a gruesome ankle injury in the second half of the 49ers. ESPN Adam Schefter reports the injury is season-ending. With Conner out for the year, Trey Benson will step into the lead role. The 2024 third-round pick had 10 carries for 42 yards against the 49ers. And we got a Najee Harris injury update. Chargers running back Najee Harris went down with a non-contact injury in the first half on Sunday. After the game, Coach Jim Harbaugh said the early indication are that Harris suffered a torn Achilles, which would end his season. First-round rookie Omarion Hampton said should take over as the clear lead back for the Chargers. And now we have a Mike Evans injury update. Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans suffered a hamstring injury on Sunday and was immediately ruled out for the rest of the game. Todd Bowles reported that it was just a tweak, but given Evans' age and history of hamstring injury, it would be a surprise if he can play week 4. Chris Godwin is close to returning from his ankle injury, but it is not given that he will be ready for next week. Rookie Egbuka was on the injury report this week, but he played and turned 8 targets into 6 catches for 85 yards, especially with Godwin returning from a serious injury of his own. Egbuka might be a thrust into the number 1 role for a couple of weeks. And we got a Nick Bosa injury update. 49ers edge rusher Nick Bosa exited against the Cardinals with a knee injury. Coach Kyle Shanahan expressed optimism for the game, but that Nick Bosa had avoided a torn ACL, but that turned out to be false hopes. Bosa will miss the rest of the season with a torn ACL, the second of his NFL career. Terry McLaurin injury update. Commanders wide receiver Terry McLaurin suffered a quad injury on a 54-yard catch on Sunday and never returned. McLaurin was initially ruled questionable by the team, and the Commanders hugely could be a part of the reason why the top receiver sat out the rest of the game. Tyrone Tracy Jr. injury update. Giants running back Tyrone Tracy Jr. left early on Sunday night after taking a big hit to his shoulder. Originally deemed questionable return, Tracy was ruled out the rest of the night after halftime. And Lane Johnson. Eagles right tackle Lane Johnson left after the opening possession on Sunday due to a neck injury and never returned to the game. Johnson did stay on the sideline but never rejoined his team on the field. The offense sputtered with Johnson on the sideline in the first half, but came alive after Fred Johnson replaced Matt Pryor. It was reported following the game that Johnson suffered a stinger and he should be active for week 4 against the Buccaneers. And now, let's get into Monday Night Football, a football banger. Lions 38, Ravens 30. Big game, huge game, awesome game. We had a glimpse of Baltimore's struggles early in this game. The contest was tied at 7, and Baltimore pinned Detroit deep in its own territory. It looked like the Ravens would force a punt when the Lions were in a 3rd and long at their own 4-yard line, but Detroit converted a first down and went on to score a touchdown on the possession that spanned 98 yards and nearly 11 minutes on the game clock. The Ravens couldn't get off the field for most of the evening as Detroit gashed them on the ground with their 2 talented running backs. It was quite apparent that the Ravens missed Pro Bowl defensive tackle Justin Madubuike and linebacker Kyle Van Noy, as their ground defense was miserable without them. Jaire Alexander's absence in the secondary was also impactful. Meanwhile, the Ravens couldn't run at all. Derrick Henry was stymied in the backfield and fumbled once again while down 28-24. Lamar Jackson, meanwhile, had some great deep throws in this game, practically to Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman, but took 7 sacks, 2 of which were losses of 19 and 18 yards. Jackson couldn't even scramble as Detroit's defensive line locked him down and got a bit lucky with some shoestring tackles. Despite the loop-sided affair, the Ravens trailed by just 7 in the fourth quarter with possession, and they were forced to punt, however. And while it appeared as though they also forced Detroit to punt on 4th and 2, the Lions went for it and converted with a Jared Goff pass to Amon-Ra St. Brown and David Montgomery, then Gallup for a 31-yard touchdown run to seal the victory. And now, we come to the last topic of our show. We got some WNBA playoff news, folks. The semifinals have arrived in the 2025 WNBA playoffs. On Sunday, the Indiana Fever continued their Cinderella run with a Game 1 victory over the Las Vegas Aces behind an outstanding performance by Kelsey Mitchell. Later in the afternoon, the Minnesota Lynx took their first game against the Phoenix Mercury after an intense and physical 40 minutes. The first round saw multiple thrilling games, and 3 of the 4 series went into decisive Game 3. The short-handed Indiana Fever ousted the 3rd seed Atlanta Dream in a significant upset, knocking the Dream out on their home floor. The Las Vegas Aces won a tight Game 3 over the Seattle Storm after seeing their 17-game win streak get snapped in Game 2, lost in the first round. The Phoenix Mercury knocked out the reigning champ New York Liberty, taking them down despite dropping the opening game of the series in overtime. The top-seeded Lynx were the only team to pull off a 2-game sweep in the first round, knocking out the Golden State Valkyries. Minnesota entered the playoffs as the number 1 seed after being the WNBA's most dominant team throughout the 44 game regular season. The Lynx looking for their fifth championship in team history and their first since 2017 will have home court advantage throughout the playoffs. Teams played a best of 3 series in the first round will play a best of 5 series in the semifinals, and in the new champs, a best of 7 game affair in the finals. In 2024, the first round had a 2-1 format, which meant higher seed get the first 2 games at home, while lower seed only get to host if they made it to game 3. This year is a 1-1-1 format, with games 1 and 3 hosted by the higher seed, while game 2 is hosted by the lower seed. With everything there, this is the end of our show. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on those post notifications. That way you get notified every time we go live and you do not miss an episode or some sick NFL content. Thank you so much. I'm your host, David. You have been watching the David Sports Show. Thank you so much for watching and have a great night. Have a great night, folks.